Bonjour, my name's Alice, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well, I hope you are relaxed. And if you're not relaxed enough, well, I have a little poem for you. Nous aurons des lits pleins d'odeurs légères, des divans profonds comme des tombeaux, et d'étranges fleurs sur des étagères, écloses pour nous sous des cieux plus beaux. Usant à l'envi leur chaleur dernière, nos deux cœurs seront deux vastes flambeaux, qui réfléchiront leur double lumière dans nos deux esprits, ces miroirs jumeaux. Un soir fait de roses et de bleus mystiques, nous échangerons un éclair unique, comme un long sanglot, tout chargé d'adieu. Et plus tard, un ange, en trouvant les portes, viendra ranimer, fidèle et joyeux, les miroirs ternis et les flammes mortes. So that was a beautiful poem from Charles Baudelaire, and I thought it was the perfect introduction to the discussion we're going to have today about French love, l'amour à la française. I asked you on Instagram if you thought the stereotypes around French love, French relationships were true, without really specifying what those stereotypes were in the first place. And among the replies I got, a few things really stood out, namely infidelity, true romantics, more open to non-exclusivity or polyamory, and one that I found quite interesting, love as a performance. Now, there are two aspects of my personal experience that are going to come into play in the way I talk about French love. And the first one is that I'm French. So I grew up in France, I consumed a lot of French media, films, I was surrounded by French people, French role models. Second thing is that I've been quite close to or even dated guys who weren't French, so I have material for comparison, empirical evidence if I may say. This is a video essay, by the way, this is very serious. Oh, and also, I already see you typing that comments, saying that your French boyfriend isn't like that, hashtag lucky, hashtag my boyfriend does the dishes, hashtag normal man. So I'm going to address it right away, yes, for sure. Every single man, every single woman will not correspond to the things I'm talking about today, but that's part of the job of a social scientist, using real facts, experiences, to create social facts. Social trends. People make culture, society, and that influences people in one way or another. A TV series like Emily in Paris will have an impact on the way you see France, French people, Paris. Well, us French people have grown up with those stereotypical media representations, so of course it's going to have an impact on the way we do love. What has been quite interesting to me is to realize that now that I spend quite a lot of time outside of France, I tend to reproduce the stereotypes way more than I used to, almost as a form of self-fetishization. Fetishization? Self-fetishization. God damn it, I can't. When I'm abroad, I'm the French girl, and the French girl aesthetic seems to me to embody not just the dress code, but also a constructed personality of French girls. A girl with character, effortlessly charismatic, free but romantic, and a strong believer in things like love at first sight or everlasting loves, etc. She's emancipated just enough to make her look sexy, but not so much so that people could think that she could live happily without a man, or even worse than that she could be perceived as a feminist. That became very clear during the MeToo movement, where thousands of testimonies really shook the foundations of what people thought was French love. Iconic French actresses, art critics, writers wrote an opinion piece on what they called the right to pester, namely men's right to flirt in many different ways, including ways that qualify as sexual harassment. These women who gained popularity during the French New Wave really represent that emancipated but not feminist brand of women. Director Eric Romer really marked that area, so late 1950s to early 1970s. His female characters became more and more independent as his career advanced, but that independency was framed by the presence of a man or a men's perspective on them. The women's bodies continue to constitute a big part of the appeal of the movie, if not the movie itself. In La Collectionneuse et Le Genou de Claire, both Haydée and Claire are subjected to the male gaze. Haydée's body is fragmented and examined by the viewer, while Claire is presented in a bikini facing the camera in this shot, or climbing a ladder with a short skirt. Other famous actresses like Laetitia Casta or Catherine Deneuve not only fit, but also defend that representation of women. They find their emancipation in the power they have over men's basic instincts, the attention they get from them. During a debate between Brigitte Lahaie, a signatory of the opinion piece, and Caroline de Haas, a feminist activist, Lahaie defended that women have a lot of power over men, but they don't realize it, to which de Haas answered that this form of primitive power perpetuates a culture of domination, objectification, and ultimately violence against women. Another signatory, Catherine Millet, that you or your parents may know for the famous book The Sexual Life of Catherine Millet, said in an interview that she wished she had been raped so that she could be the proof that you can move on. This woman makes suffering part of a woman's romantic and sexual life, and I'm not gonna argue that love doesn't hurt. Of course it does sometimes. But as the journalist and essayist Mona Chollet explained in her book Réinventer l'amour, il y a souffrir et souffrir, meaning that some of the suffering that men and women experience in heterosexual relationships could be avoided if we took the time to rethink how we approach romance. As I said previously, the MeToo movement kind of shook the foundations of what French people call la séduction à la française, l'art d'aimer à la française. These concepts have been forged by hundreds of canonical texts over the centuries, movies, letters, paintings, etc. We can start with Les Liaisons Dangereuses, a scandalous and controversial novel about two French aristocrats where le Vicomte de Valmont and the Marquise de Merteuil form an unholy alliance and turn seduction into a game which they must win. Le Vicomte de Valmont remains a figure of French seduction till this very day. He's smart, he's shrewd, he's charismatic. In the French podcast Les Couilles sur la Table, Victoire Tuaillon explains how she read the book as a teenager, just like me at school, and could sense that there was something off but couldn't really pinpoint what it was. And it's only during the summer 2018 that she reread the book and realized that Le Vicomte de Valmont is such a... In France we would call that a relou, the type of guy that doesn't take no for an answer and will insist again and again until he gets what he wants. She said, Valmont is unbearable. He's the equivalent of those guys who spam you with DMs every day. Here's another example. This painting made it to the exhibition Fragonard in Love. Fragonard is a famous French painter of the 18th century, and this painting, Le Verrou, doesn't look very romantic. The woman doesn't look like she's having a good time as the man is locking the door. Nevertheless, the people running the exhibition still thought that it was okay. It could be put under the label Fragonard in Love. French people have confused and romanticized non-consensual intercourses into an excess of passionate love. Our culture presents men's desires as uncontrollable, and it even sometimes put the blame on the women for arousing such passion. The term seducer is constantly used to refer to famous men who have been accused of rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment in the press. Writer and producer Claude Lanzmann is an abrupt narcissist seducer. More recently, a historical figure of the daily evening news show, Patrick Prof d'Arvor, is described once again by journalists and friends as an eternal seducer. But the 20 women who publicly testified against him assured the interviewers that they weren't seduced in any way. Intimidated, yes, but not seduced. There is a real issue here in France in the way we deal with rape, sexual harassment, as if chivalry and seduction were so ingrained in French gentleman's identity that such defiance cannot even be conceptualized. The general panic emerging every time a new accusation against a famous French person appears shows that what's under threat isn't just the respectability of an individual man, but also a collective identity. People associate France with romanticism. People talk about French as a love language, and some of you shared their experience with French people saying that it seems that they take love more seriously or they are more prone to do romantic stuff. While some are scared that the denunciation of abusers will tarnish that image. One of them is Pascal Bruckner, a French writer and essayist. In 2011, after the DSK affair, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, an influential French politician, also described as a seducer, was accused of rape by a Sofitel housekeeper called Nafissatou Diallo. Pascal Bruckner wrote an opinion piece in Le Monde where he kind of talked about the whole affair and started with an anecdote of him and his family on a beach in Florida where his daughter came back to them and she started removing her bathing suit, and it was completely normal for them, but the people around them found it a bit weird, were a bit embarrassed. Soon a sheriff came and asked the parents to put some clothes back on the girl, and his conclusion after this anecdote is that American people really have an issue with sex. He then proceeded to talk about the DSK affair, pretty much defending him and arguing against the criticism he received from feminist organizations in the US and in France. And throughout the article, his argument is pretty consistent. namely that the culture around sex and love in the US is very different from that of France, and they just don't get it. He thinks that Americans use the DSK affair to mock and condemn French love, and he concluded with this sentence: "We can learn a lot from our American friends, but certainly not how to love." It's interesting to me to see that he thought the word love had a place in that article, talking about rape, talking about his daughter naked on the beach. It's like he tried to counter the criticism on problematic French way of seducing, and just became an example of it. I won't go into details into how he talked about women in this article, but this is one instance of a larger anti-Americanization movement in France. By that I mean that the rise of identity-based movements like Black Lives Matter, MeToo, are perceived as a threat against French universalist model. Or the demand for individual liberties, like the right to wear hijab, is seen as an attack on French Republican secularism. So basically no sign that could show your religion in public institutions. What is really at stake here, and what scares people like Pascal Bruckner, is the loss of something that gave them the right to behave in the worst ways possible and get away with it. He's a seducer. These men see their golden days coming to an end as American feminist literature, books, talks, work in universities became a source of inspiration for French women and French feminist organizations who can access and understand those resources. Feminist literature, from girl boss books to more radical manifestos, give arguments and tools so that women feel confident enough to say when something is not appropriate. I remember once I went on a date with a guy who was probably 6 years older than me, and he felt the need very early on to justify why he was on a dating app, saying that it's because you can't really strike up a conversation with a woman in the street anymore. It would be a bit creepy. He said that with a malicious smile and slightly raised eyebrows. No, not like that. Yeah, more like that, yeah. I'm not going to make too many assumptions, but it was quite clear to me that he was one of the guys who think that feminism is threatening French art of seducing. He did say later in the conversation that he found me beautiful, and he immediately raised his hand and started laughing, asking if he was allowed to say that. Yeah, like that. I mean, of course you can say it. You can even say it twice. Why am I talking about that? Yeah, I think it's important to note that he was 6 years older than me, because I didn't find that sort of behavior among younger guys I went on a date with. Actually, when I read Pascal Bruckner's opinion piece, the first thing I thought was, this guy is getting old. It sounds very old-fashioned. In fact, most progressive men today would probably think the same thing, would be repulsed by this language and that sort of take on love and seduction. I mean, the discussions one can find in feminist literature made their way to mainstream media, and for sure, only a certain type of feminists are invited, and they're often discredited as soon as they become a bit too radical. But at least those ideas are getting out there, and more people in position of power take them seriously. There's a lot of work to do to deconstruct centuries of amalgamation of love with suffering. And I'm not talking about heartbreak type of suffering. I'm talking about sexual assault, rape, harassment, moral abuse, etc. A lot of work needs to be done to deconstruct gender stereotypes that ultimately lead to violence. I mean, if you've been told since you were a kid that your desires are what matters most, of course we're gonna have some issues with things like consent. And women have a lot to unlearn as well. I remember reading Sally Rooney's latest book, Beautiful World, Where Are You? So not that long ago, and I was a bit skeptical about the sex passages, especially between Alice and Felix, primarily because Felix was asking permission for every single thing he wanted to do to her. That felt cringe to me at that moment, and it took me some time to realize that that is consent. We've been so conditioned to see those sex scenes where everything is so effortlessly performed. It's speechless, it's smooth. The lovers communicate through touch, through the eyes, and the clothes disappeared by themselves. But consent isn't just a yes at the beginning. Asking questions throughout the thing, taking little pauses just to make sure how you feel, if you want to continue. It's good, it's not cringe at all, and it can even become quite funny. If I could sum up this video in a few sentences, I would say that we were completely misled in the way we envision love and seduction, and that it's really hurting heterosexual relationships. Love isn't just a performance, and I feel like French people can sometimes be quite bad at recognizing that because of our culture. So we talked about the hundreds of texts, poems, paintings that romanticize toxicity and violence. While today I still see very dramatic quotes from French New Wave movies, the account Amour Solitaire that I followed for quite some time follows the same logic. It's very romantic, poetic, it captures love in its most dramatic form. And sure, we can all be a little bit dramatic sometimes, but building a relationship on that is so toxic. A majority of women follow the account, which reinforces the idea that women are the most romantically involved in a relationship, that love, finding love, is the most important thing in their lives. We were socialized like that, and every time we get a bit too much involved into something and face rejection, then we are told that we need to focus on ourselves, put ourselves first, but it's not that simple, right? I really like this little illustration by Chollet, because as women, we're naturally attracted to that Prince Charming energy, and once we're trapped into that emotional turmoil, it's really hard to get out of it. As Bell Hooks said in her book All About Love, I'm going to read the passage, "I'm disturbed by the weighty emphasis on self in so much New Age writing on the topic, and in our culture as a whole. When I would talk about my yearning for a loving partner, people told me over and over that I did not need anyone else. They would say I did not need a companion and/or a circle of loved ones to feel complete, that I should be complete inside myself. While it is definitely true that inner contentness and a sense of fulfillment can be there, whether or not we commune in love with others, it is equally meaningful to give voice to that longing for communion. Life without communion in love with others would be less fulfilling no matter the extent of one's self-love. All over the world, people live in intimate daily contact with one another. They wash together, eat and sleep together, face challenges together, share joy and sorrow. The rugged individual who relies on no one else is a figure who can only exist in a culture of domination." What I really like about Bell Hooks and Mona Chollet, who wrote this book that really inspired this video, is that they're not afraid to talk about love in the context of heterosexual relationships as feminists. Chollet called herself a poule mouillée du féminisme, so that would be a wimp of feminism in a way, in the sense that no matter how independent she is, there's always a little part of her that want to believe in the beauty of love, a communion of two souls. The problem in heterosexual relationships isn't so much that women love too much, but rather that men don't love enough. Seduction is one instance of love, a selfish form of love, I would argue. It's more like a game. True love is care, like a mother or father caring for their children, like you caring for your friends. It's caring for the people around you, even those you don't know. To me, there's nothing more attractive than a man who truly cares, not just about me, because, you know, when we want to conquer someone, we want to be our best selves, so that can be a bit misleading, but care about the people around him, care about the little things. So yeah, as I said, very inspired by this book. Réinventer l'amour, Reinvent love. As always, I'll put a bunch of book references. I'll try to find a few talks as well, so that you can learn more about it and together we can reinvent love. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, we can continue the discussion in the comments section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, if it's not done already. I want to thank my Patreons for their support. A special thanks to Joshelle, Carla, Jay, Benjamin, Oswald, Was At Witch. If you want to support me on Patreon, you'll find a link in the description box. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. Salut!